The following you are about to hear may seem strange and bizarre, but it is our intention to bring you only documented proof. The general public is unaware of the fact that for the past 200 years, fires of revolution have been smoldering beneath the whole structure of civilization. In 1953, the California Senate Investigating Committee on Education released its 11th annual report. On pages 169 and 170 of that document, we find the following words, quote, "So-called modern communism is apparently the same hypocritical and deadly world conspiracy to destroy civilization that was founded by the secret order of the Illuminati in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776. The recognition of May 1st, 1776, as the founding date of this world revolution conspiracy is not hard to understand when it is realized that May Day is frequently celebrated even in recent times by rioting and bloodshed on a worldwide scale. It was not until 1847 or 48 that the communist conspirators who had theretofore operated in secret came out into the open with the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, boldly proclaiming against practically everything upon which civilization is based: God, religion, the family, individual liberty, and so forth. The concluding paragraph on the manifesto reading, "Communists scorn to hide their views and aims. They openly declare that their purpose can only be achieved by forcible overthrow of the whole existing social order. Let the ruling classes tremble at the prospect of a communist revolution. Proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Proletarians of all lands unite." In issuing this manifesto, the communist conspirators evidently believed the time had arrived when, with the aid of ignorant victims, a worldwide takeover could be accomplished. But there were not enough ignorant victims to manipulate them, and the expectant coup failed. The conspirators thereupon conceived a plan for the future of supplementing the long-established secret conspiracy in existence since 1776 with an unremitting public campaign for victims among the ignorant of all nations, and in an attempt to hide from view the underlying hypocritical conspiracy existing since May 1st, 1776, it was decided that in such public campaign, the Manifesto of 1848 should be heralded as the founding date of communism, and Karl Marx falsely proclaimed as its author. So wrote the elected members of this California State Senate Committee in 1953. Here and there, lone voices have been raised to alert the world to the imminent dangers from this satanic conspiracy of the forces of darkness. Their voices have largely gone unheeded, and even many leaders of the so-called anti-communist movement have failed to grasp the staggering realities of this conspiracy within the conspiracy.
In 1829, I just tell you these things because it shows how this conspiracy moves year by year and right up to the present day. In 1829, an English illuminist named Fanny Wright You might wonder at a person of the female sex being mixed up in this thing, but the Grand Orient Lodges and the councils of the New and Reformed Palladium Rites organize what they call councils of adoption. That is the female organization that work hand in glove with the Illuminati. This woman lectured to selected groups of Illuminists in the new Masonic temple which had been built in New York. She explained the Luciferian ideology regarding free love and sexual liberty. She also informed the American Illuminists it was intended to organize atheistic communism for the purpose of furthering their own secret plans and ambitions. Among those who were delegated to put this phase of the conspiracy into effect was Clinton Roosevelt, Horace Greeley, and Charles Dada. Nobody had ever heard the word communism used generally at that date. As a matter of fact, the word communism was not put into common use until after Lenin and Trotsky usurped power in 17 from the Mensheviks who had fought the Russian Revolution. It was only then that the word communism became into common use. I want you to mark these things very carefully.
In 1841, Clinton Roosevelt published a book called The Science of Government Founded in Natural Law. That book embodies Weissaup's pattern of a one-world UN-type dictatorship. Clinton Roosevelt was a direct ancestor of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Roosevelt, Greeley, and Dada organized the Locofoco Party in 1834 to cover the real purpose. They organized the first labor movement in the United States the following year, and then covered their activities under the name of the Whig Party. And the money that they raised by these activities was used to finance none other than Karl Marx to write the Communist Manifesto in Das Kapital in Soho, London, England. Karl Marx was the nephew of a Jewish rabbi, but he defected from Judaism. He was baptized into the Christian religion, and he was a hater of the Jews. He was no more an atheist than what I am. But he wrote that document so that he could get people who had lost their faith to join the Communist Party and allow themselves to be used to further the secret plans of the Illuminati.
In the early 1850s, the Illuminati held a secret meeting in New York, which was addressed by a British Illuminist named Wright. Those in attendance were told that the Illuminati was organizing to unite the nihilist and atheist groups with all other subversive groups into an international to be known as communists. That was when the word communist first came into being, and it was intended to be the supreme weapon and scare word to terrify the whole world and drive the terrorized peoples into the Illuminati one world scheme. This scheme, communism, was to be used to enable the Illuminati to foment future wars and revolutions. Clinton Roosevelt, a direct ancestor of Franklin Roosevelt, Horace Greeley, and Charles Dana, foremost newspaper publishers of that time, were appointed to head a committee to raise funds for the new venture. Of course, most of the funds were provided by the Rothschilds. And this fund was used to finance Karl Marx and Engels when they wrote Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto in Soho, England. And this clearly reveals that communism is not a so-called ideology, but a secret weapon, a bogeyman word to serve the purpose of the Illuminati. Weishaupt died in 1830, but prior to his death he prepared a revised version of the age-old conspiracy, the Illuminati, which under various aliases was to organize, finance, direct, and control all international organizations and groups by working their agents into executive positions at the top. In the United States, we have Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Rusk, McNamara, Fulbright, etc. as prime examples. In addition, while Karl Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto under the direction of one group of Illuminists, Professor Karl Ritter of Frankfurt University was writing the antithesis under direction of another group. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy could use the differences in those two so-called ideologies to enable them to divide larger and larger members of the human race into opposing camps so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other, and particularly to destroy all political and religious institutions. When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy, but actually they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media into believing that communism is a movement of the so-called workers, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy when atheistic communism and the whole of Christianity can be forced into an all-out Third World War within each remaining nation, as well as on an international scale.
Politicians, major industrialists, and the military, unable to reach a compromise with the Tsar, gravitated to the idea of a conspiracy. Many of them, political adversaries in the open, were allied behind the scenes, all members of a secret Freemason brotherhood, the Great East of Peoples of Russia. Founded in St. Petersburg about 1912, the organization was controlled by a Supreme Council and had more than 300 members. In 1916, popular lawyer Alexander Kerensky became head of the Supreme Council. He and other Great East members nurtured a plan of an anti-Tsarist coup.
What did the order want to accomplish in the Bolshevik Revolution?
You create opposing forces which you place in conflict. Out of conflict, you've got profit, you've got political power, and you can direct history. And if you look at the writings, for example, of the Trilateral Commission, they talk openly in the Trilateral Commission about managing conflicts, not solving conflicts, but managing conflicts. Conflict management, that's the cry.
So they got the profit, the power, and the management. Mm-hmm. Where did they want to steer history through the Bolshevik Revolution?
They wanted to set up, and they did, two opposing forces. Out of that came World War II. There were logical steps in the process. They used the same bank, Guarantee Trust Company, as the conduit for the financing of Hitler, and also as a conduit for financing, and also the early days of the Russian Revolution. In fact, in Russia, Soviet Russia in 1923, a vice president of Guarantee Trust Company was the foreign director of the Roscombank, which was the first Soviet overseas bank that was set up. They were that close in those days.
The League of Nations was the money cartel's first attempt at world control, but Tsar Nicholas II of Russia caught on to their plot and sabotaged it. That proved to be a deadly mistake. Schiff, Warburg, Rockefeller, Harriman, and Morgan backed the uprisings that led to the 1917 Russian Revolution. Their strategy was to finance both sides of wars and revolutions, which gave them control over the winners, the losers, and the outcome. Between 1918 and 1921, 14 million Russians died from war and starvation under Lenin's Bolsheviks. By 1919, Lenin ran up a national debt to the Rothschild banksters of $60 billion, which put Russia firmly under their control. As Mayor Rothschild once said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes her laws." To this day, the Rothschilds have stopped the heirs to the Tsar's fortunes from claiming their deposits held in Rothschild banks. Those fortunes are now worth an estimated $50 billion. Joseph Stalin, who was financed by the same money cartel, replaced Lenin as Russia's brutal new dictator. Using terror and death threats, Stalin's job was to industrialize Russia and turn communism into a powerful counterforce to democracy. Manufactured conflicts between these two powerful political forces would be the ideal excuse for all future wars and for dividing, conquering, and ruling the world.
But profits were not the only motive. There was also revenge. The money changers never forgave the Tsars for their support of Lincoln during the Civil War. Also, Russia was the last major European nation to refuse to give in to the privately owned central bank scheme. 3 years after World War I broke out, the Russian Revolution toppled the Tsar and installed the scourge of communism. Jacob Schiff of Kuhn Loeb and Company bragged from his deathbed that he had spent $20 million towards the defeat of the Tsar. Money was funneled from England to support the revolution as well. Why would some of the richest men in the world financially back communism, the system that was openly vowing to destroy the so-called capitalism that made them wealthy? Researcher Gary Allen explained it this way.
If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is, in reality, a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super-rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite.
As W. Cleon Skousen put it in his 1970 book, The Naked Capitalist,
power from any source tends to create an appetite for additional power. It was almost inevitable that the super-rich would one day aspire to control not only their own wealth, but the wealth of the whole world. To achieve this, they were perfectly willing to feed the ambitions of the power-hungry political conspirators who were committed to the overthrow of all existing governments and the establishments of a central worldwide dictatorship.
But what if these revolutionaries get out of control and try to seize power from the super-rich? After all, it was Mao Zedong who in 1938 stated his position concerning power. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. The Wall Street, London axis elected to take the risk. The master planners attempted to control revolutionary communist groups by feeding them vast quantities of money when they obeyed and contracting their money supply or even financing their opposition if they got out of control. Lenin began to understand that although he was the absolute dictator of the new Soviet Union, he was not pulling the financial strings. Someone else was silently in control.
The state does not function as we desired. The car does not obey. A man is at the wheel and seems to lead it, but the car does not drive in the desired direction. It moves as another force wishes.